Good evening. This video is brought to you by the Christmas Deer. Okay, so I want to talk about power and the problems and the possibilities that exist between communicative power, social power, and a just society. So there's all kinds of ways of conceptualizing what power is, right? Some of how we understand power is the ability to not be accountable for your actions, right? We think of folks with incredible wealth who can hire lawyers to make their problems go away. One of the ways that you can conceptualize power is as an expression of ability to make change, to cause the world to become different. One of the ways that we conceptualize power is who has authority, who has the legitimate ability to shape a situation because of who they are or the role that they hold. So part of how I want to approach this is to think about a couple of dynamics with respect to power. So power in a micro, macro, and meso way. Um, Thinking about power prepositionally, thinking about power from the perspective of authority, and then we'll move on to the question of the relationship between power and justice. So right off the bat, power exists like all communication phenomena in small, medium, and large ways. So power exists in a micro way in interpersonal relationships, the people that you take most seriously, the people that you're most afraid of, the people in your family who have the most ability to mobilize the rest of the family, um, who is more likely to make decisions. All of these are examples of power that play out in micro level interactions. But power also gets expressed in meso level ways. So it informs how organizations work, who gets to choose what the policies of a particular organization are, who decides which institutions and effort is accountable to. All of those are meso level power expressions. Who's in the room, who makes the decisions. And then, of course, power exists on a macro level. The way that culture constructs authority, who gets to make nationwide or society wide decisions, whose interests are most considered when deciding new directions or how new assets should be allocated. Um, so power, right, exists in micro, meso, and macro level ways. The second thing that I think is important for understanding how social power works is to recognize that it has a prepositional nature. And by that, I mean that power works differently when we think about how the person who has or is acting on the power exists in relationship to others. So often the most common prepositional form of power is we think of power over. So when we say that someone is powerful, often what we're saying is that they have power over other people. They have power over you. They have power over an institution. But power over is only one expression of power. There's also, for instance, the power with. So basically, expressing power in a relationship that's mutual. So your teacher might have power over you inside of a classroom, but you might generate power with a fellow student as you study together. Neither one of you has legitimate authority over the other one, but together you're more capable of getting a better grade because you share your understandings and you use the discipline of shared study time to both get better grades. You could really think of power as situated through all of the prepositions. So power within, power to, power for, power against, power um, outside, power inside. All of these shape and nuance the way that power is created. So power for instance, that's the advocate, the person who flexes their power in order to accomplish things on behalf of the other, or power through is working through a medium. Maybe the power is not ordinarily held by a particular person, but they gain power through. Um, Power to is can be understood as a transactive kind of power, like sharing power with another person or transferring power to. And one of the things I think is super interesting is that each of these prepositional expressions of power um, changes in appropriateness, particularly in social justice contexts, depending on the situation. So, is power for good or bad? Is it just or unjust? Well, it can be profoundly just if you have power in a situation and you can exercise your power on behalf of another person. That can be extraordinary, like a really critical part of the way society gets better. But the problem is some people, ultimately, all people need to express and encounter and use their own power. And so, if you always keep someone in a position where you have the power and it is always you who's acting on their behalf, in some ways, holding strongly onto power for is like a form of infantilization of the other, right? We often think of power to as a good thing, like I'm giving power to someone else. Oh, well, it's empowering, right? Well, yeah, but there are all kinds of forms of empowerment that are profoundly unjust, right? Like empowering someone to do something without broader participation, or empowering someone to do something that causes people's flourishing, or freedom to be limited. Like those don't have just outcomes. Um, so anyway, one of the things that it can be really helpful to think through is when you're trying to understand how power is connected to efforts of justice, is to recognize that there are different prepositional qualities and different situations call um, for different expressions of power. Um, I guess the last kind of conceptual framework for power that I'll name is just recognizing that there are different kinds of social authority. There's a legitimate authority, which is the power that comes from position. There's expert authority that comes from knowing really well. People who know a lot have power because people want to listen to them. There's referent authority, which is basically like the power of rapport, or the fact that you like and respect someone gives them power because you're willing to listen to them. And so if you take these things, the various connections of power, various definitions of power, power across various orders of magnitude, the different prepositional qualities of power, and these different kinds of authority, part of what you start to see is a pretty textured picture of the way power acts in society. And with that, you can start to put some tread on the relationship between power and justice. So obviously, power and its unequal distribution is one of the central drivers of inequity in society. In fact, it's unequal power often feels like inequity. One person being able to change more, one person being able to make other people do what they want, one person being able to create more, makes the people who have less power, right? It makes it conspicuous. So unequal distribution of power has bad outcomes, and it can just feel bad in its own right. And so it's quite easy to see the ways that power leads to injustice, right? So if power is unequally distributed, then decisions are going to get made by those folks. And if those folks likely aren't going to be able to make the decisions in a way that maximizes the good of other people, which leads to situations that are designed for some but not others, which leads to negative outcomes for the folks who the world was designed to leave at the margin. Um, Power over and power against, are common ways that harm gets done. So lots of expressions of violence and oppression are kind of over expressions of power over. But it's also critically important to recognize that power in and of itself is what activism requires, right? In order to maintain something that is just, you need to exert power. And in order to create new conditions that are more just, you need to activate the change potential. Which is why people talk about power to the people, or the strength in numbers, or resting in power when an activist passes, because recognizing that power is the way that the good can come to pass, is a mature understanding of what it means to be human. Um, so it's a both and, right? Power and its unequal distribution is part of why the world is fucked up. And it's part of how the world also gets better. Um, so I guess in closing, I just wanted to say that one of the things that I think about is how power is often masculinized in at least U.S. society. We often think of power in male terms. And my experience with Taoism and Buddhism, I myself am not a Taoist or a Buddhist, but I'm deeply inspired by the philosophies that are connected to those religions, spiritualities. Um, and that in Taoism, one of the things that they talk about is the power of the cup, or the power of the uncultivated block of wood, and that there is profound power in openness and in vulnerability, and that power is not just this expression of invulnerability, this thing that refuses to be changed and only changes other things. And that when you think of who has the power to bring a human into being, it's the human with the capacious uterus. When you think about the person who has the power to feed other people, it's the person who can manifest the power in the seed. When you think of someone who has the power to quench the thirst of another, it's by drawing on the power of the openness of the cup. And so I think it's important to recognize that power is not always pushing or fighting or harming or forcing, but that the generative, creative, blossoming power of a fertile and unfolding universe is also part of what it means to change the world.